Every day you pass by some spot where something happened, but you don't know about it.
It's just kind of funny how these buildings tell the story, only if people knew, you know?
Richard Pryor is comedy. Like, he is an idea of what the American dream is, where you come from nothing, you turn it into your art, and then you become the greatest ever to do something.
My dad grew up in a brothel. My great-grandmother, you know, ran the house. You know, it was like a normal little life, but not normal.
Here, he's really stripped down to nothing. It's a bare-bones apartment. It's not a place that people really remark upon. And yet it was the site of this remarkable personal and artistic transformation.
The fact that he was a comedian and not just a drug addict is a miracle.
A place like Red's Place, that's where he engages in what he calls the Coke Olympics.
It happened here, right here on Parthenia Street. Richard Pryor lit himself on fire and ran down this very street in an attempt to kill himself.
Richard Franklin Lennox Thomas Pryor was born at St. Francis Hospital in Peoria, Illinois, a town about halfway between Chicago and St. Louis. Peoria wasn't always the sleepy Midwestern town it is today. In the 1930s and 40s, Peoria was one of the most corrupt, wide-open, freewheeling cities in the entire country. Scott Saul is an expert on the early years of Richard Pryor's life.
When he's born in 1940, Peoria is known as the Sin City of the Midwest. That means open sex, open gambling, open bribery.
All of which were on full display on North Washington Street in Peoria's red light district, where Richard's grandmother Marie owned a brothel. His mother Gertrude was a prostitute, and his father Buck was a hustler and a pimp.
These brothels are the family business. So his grandmother Marie is the madam. His dad, Buck, is the enforcer. What this means for him is that he's growing up in a world that's saturated in violence and sexuality, and the two are mingled in ways that are very confusing.
Young Richard would be startled awake by screams and wasn't sure where they were coming from or what they meant.
Some people look at him growing up and think, oh man, this is such a brutal world, such a violent world, such a tough world. Yeah, that's tragedy, you know? For Richard Pryor, it was normality.
Richard Pryor Jr. is the second born of Richard's 7 children.
Yeah, my dad grew up in a brothel. My great-grandmother, you know, ran the house, and his mother actually was a prostitute as well. Grandpa Buck, you know, he was a pimp there as well. So it was something that you always saw and knew, so you didn't look at it as anything different, like, oh, my family's running whorehouses, you know, it's what it was, you know, that's all you knew. You know, it's like a normal little life, but not normal.
Growing up in a brothel gives Richard an edgy, unsparing look at American life, one that he'll use to his advantage when he starts performing comedy. He's raised in the brothel by his grandmother Marie, a strict disciplinarian who rules over the household with an iron fist. Emma Payton was a childhood friend of Richard Pryor.
His grandmother was a very tough lady, and most of us were afraid of her. Sometimes when we'd be playing and she would holler, "Richard," you know, we knew it was trouble time then. We mostly ran home, and he would have to go home, so we don't know what happened when he got there, but we didn't think it was very good.
Marie Pryor was a formidable woman. I think that when people remember her, she gets magnified, you know, so she's 6'4" or like Paul Bunyan. I don't think she was physically that big, but the fact that people remember her that way speaks to the force of her personality and the fact that she felt, if when you were in her presence, you knew that you had to abide by Marie's way.
It was like his mother, you know, and she raised him and took care of him. She definitely would discipline you. Stories about the switches was all true, but she actually loved you.
Richard escapes the horrors of the brothel by going to the movies. His first exposure to comedy comes from his father, who introduces him to the comedic genius of Jerry Lewis.
What do you do to escape, especially during that time period? You go to the movies, you watch movies.
He goes with his father to see Sailor Beware, this Jerry Lewis film, and his father cracks up. He's laughing so hard, and he's like, he never saw his father that way. So he was like, whoa, I can actually even reach a guy like my father.
Cliff Nesterhoff is an author and podcaster known as the Human Encyclopedia of Comedy.
And Richard Pryor saw that movie, loved it, and it sort of changed his life. When he walked out of the theater, he was doing a Jerry Lewis impression, the Ivan, and then walking on his insteps all the way home with hundreds of other kids from Peoria, Illinois, who now were emulating Jerry Lewis.
The silver screen offers Richard a brief escape from his troubled home life and a glimpse of a larger world he longed to be a part of. Though there were no signs or plaques marking the site, Blaine Sumner Elementary School is a critical location in Richard Pryor's development as a comedian. Richard struggles academically and socially, but his sixth grade teacher, Margaret Yingst, sees some promise in him and makes him a bargain. Margaret Kelch was Richard's classmate and friend at Blaine Sumner Elementary and Trewen Middle Schools in Peoria.
Oh, Mrs. Yingst was a wonderful teacher. She'd say, now, Richard, if you are good, after lunch, you can stand up and tell your jokes. I remember how Richard could be so sad 1 minute, and as soon as the teacher said, Richard, you can get up and tell your jokes, he was just the happiest person on earth. He was always just Richard, funny and sad, and everything rolled up into one.
Richard tells jokes in the Blaine Sumner schoolyard during lunch hour, while Margaret and her friends have a singing group, the Glow Girls, who serve as his opening act.
Kids would sit on the steps at lunchtime. We'd have all the kids come over, and first the girls would come out and we'd sing our song. And Richard would come out and tell his jokes, and everybody was laughing, clapping. It was our regular little lunchtime show. I think it was the first place where Richard put on a show of sorts. I was his opening act.
Richard's middle school, Trewen Junior High, plays an equally vital role, but for all the wrong reasons.
Richard was the only black kid there, and a lot of times they would pick on him at lunchtime. And I was in the classroom one day. Richard came in, he was crying. He said, Mrs. Costigan, those kids out there have called me a n***. And Mrs. Costigan said, well, Richard, why are you so upset? That's what you are. And I was shocked. I've never forgotten that to this day.
The schoolyard taunts at Trewen Junior High are an early lesson about race in America, a topic that Richard would later mine for comedy with searing, brutal honesty. Luckily, he soon finds a place where his fledgling talent could be nurtured, and it would change his life forever.
Carver Community Center was a staple, and still is a staple, in the African-American community in Peoria, Illinois.
And the Carver Center is created by black women as a community center for black youth to kind of lift them up.
Maurice Gwynn was a contemporary of Richard's at the Carver Center.
The Carver Center was, can I say, a mecca for us, simply because at the Carver Center, we got exposed to other culture.
The Carver Center, he goes from being a class clown and a cut-up to being a person who has a stage and with an audience, an appreciative audience.
Richard finds an unlikely ally and mentor at the Carver Center. Her name was Juliet Whitaker, and she ran the center's drama program.
Miss Whitaker mentored Richard and kind of helped him to bring his comedy into a place to where it just wasn't silly comedy. She helped him to develop it to where it would really make an impact.
So they would just spend hours in her office brainstorming ideas for skits, for plays. Juliet Whitaker said, you can tap that magic part of yourself, and that could become your life.
Juliet puts Richard on the Carver Center stage, where he performs for an African-American audience for the first time. And he's a hit.
I don't think Richard would have made it as well as he did if he hadn't had the Carver Center as a platform. I think that gave him the confidence to go on and really develop his trade.
Well, the scene was all set up for the plays and the characters. Richard would be a specific character. He would play his role, and he got a chance to experience Hollywood right here in the beginning. He was a very funny person because he would bring out things about people that other people never thought of till he brought them out.
The Carver Center leaves an indelible mark on Richard Pryor and gives him the confidence he would need to succeed. But Richard's time on this stage is cut short when he's expelled from high school after picking a fight with his 9th grade science teacher. It's the start of a cycle of violence that would follow Richard from Peoria to the bright lights of New York City, where he would soon get his big break.
I think within 2 years, he was on national TV.
And to his tumultuous second marriage in Los Angeles.
Richard Pryor used to beat women, used to punch them in the face, and we don't talk about that.
For every performer, there were places where life-changing events happened, events that shaped and impacted who they became. Growing up in a brothel in the red light district of Peoria, Illinois, was normal everyday life for young comedian Richard Pryor. And though he had a rough childhood in a highly segregated Midwestern town, Peoria's schools and the Carver Community Center helped kickstart his career as a performer.
Peoria was, you have to understand, it was a segregated community at that time. We were confined to our areas, and we thought this was the limits, our borders, more or less.
Back then, racial tension was worse than it even is nowadays, of course, a lot worse. The black people stayed on their side of town, white people stayed on theirs, but there was a line there where Richard's line was and my line was. I think living around a lot of white people affected Richard because he just felt like he wasn't a part of anything. I think Richard told jokes because it was his way of trying to fit in and trying to get people to like him.
So Richard Pryor gets kicked out of high school in 9th grade. He takes a series of desultory jobs, menial jobs, sweeping up in a strip club, working in meat packing and so on. He hates it. And then he takes a ticket out of Peoria, which is joining the Army.
Richard is stationed in Germany in 1959, but it's clear he doesn't have the disposition for a life in the Army. He's given a discharge after stabbing a fellow soldier and ends up back in Peoria at the same dead-end jobs he left behind a year earlier.
So he gets a few gigs in Peoria for about a year and a half, where basically the people who were running the brothels and taverns, they give him his first jobs.
In 1961, Richard marries for the first of 7 times to a woman named Patricia Price. They divorce just 80 days later, but they have a son together, Richard Jr. And it's not long before Richard starts using his young son to open his act for him.
He told me what to say, and I started going out and introducing him. It was great. Ladies and gentlemen, my father, Richard Pryor. It was like great, real corny now you think about it. Oh, my dad didn't hide anything as far as his material or anything. That was the life. You know, I was 3 years old calling people mother***ers. Nothing was hidden from us.
But the performing gigs were few and far between in Peoria.
He really wasn't doing anything. He was actually, I remember when my grandfather on my mother's side, my mom's father, took him to a hospital to put in applications, and he came back and said the hospital was closed. I mean, he just didn't want to work a regular job. He wanted to perform.
Seeing no future in Peoria and looking to escape his childhood demons, Richard leaves town to pursue a career performing.
He came by my house, and he told me that he was leaving town. And I asked him why, and he said he just couldn't make it here anymore. I asked him where he was going. He said he didn't know, but he was going to get on the highway. Whichever way someone picked him up, that's where he'd go.
Richard relocates to New York City in 1963, a time when opportunities are starting to open up for African-American performers, thanks to a comedian named Dick Gregory.
Comedy was segregated, and black comedians were not accepted by the powers that be. It's not that they weren't accepted by audiences. Audiences didn't even have the chance to be exposed to them, you know? In 1961, Dick Gregory was a comedian who burst onto the scene and briefly became the most popular stand-up comedian in America. Dick Gregory became the first African-American comedian to cross over. And because of him, it opened up for every young black comedian. It became a trend. So it was because of Dick Gregory, Richard Pryor has his first televised opportunities and appearances in front of white crowds.
Richard hits the Greenwich Village coffeehouse circuit, performing stand-up and monologues alongside future luminaries like Joan Rivers and George Carlin. And with his talents and confidence growing, Richard soon finds himself on national TV.
I was born in 1962, and after he left to go to New York, I think within 2 years he was on national TV performing.
It's a show hosted by Rudy Valley on Broadway Tonight. And basically, he goes into this monologue where he's talking supposedly about his life, but it's all a fiction. He can't actually talk about how he grew up in Peoria, how he grew up in the red light district. These are unmentionable facts.
It may have been a false narrative, but audiences responded to Richard's material. He quickly becomes a regular on the talk show circuit. His clean-cut act, inspired by Bill Cosby and Jerry Lewis, is starting to take him places.
So comedy was very censored and very controlled when Richard Pryor was entering it in 1963-64. Even though America was loosening up a little bit, the nightclub stage was not. So when you watch the early stand-up of Richard Pryor, 1963-64, most of the footage is in black and white. He's thin, he's skinny, he's clean-shaven, he's wearing a skinny tie and a nice suit. He's very physical, and he's very limber. And he uses that sort of slim physique in his comedy. And he's kind of a physical comedian in a lot of ways.
Richard's years in New York bring him success and make him a household name. But by 1967, he starts longing for something more. He packs up his bags and moves across the country to Los Angeles, hoping the new location will spark something inside him. He experiments with pot, LSD, and cocaine, and tries to figure out his next move.
Something else is brewing in him, which is he's trying to think, how can I bring the language of my childhood, the world of my childhood, the world of my experience onto the stage?
One night in 1967, at the Aladdin Theater in Las Vegas, Richard breaks down on stage. He stops his act mid-show, looks out at the all-white crowd and says,
"What the F am I doing here?" And he just leaves the stage and drives back to LA. The problem was that he couldn't be himself, and he couldn't tap into his potential as a performer. He couldn't tap into all those characters from his childhood.
The incident at the Aladdin is the first time that the real Richard Pryor reveals himself on stage, and it starts him on a path of self-actualization and self-destruction, in a pattern that would repeat itself. Richard marries, has a child, and then divorces within the span of a year. His propensity for violence makes him incapable of sustaining a relationship.
Richard Pryor used to beat women, used to punch them in the face.
It's very, very, very bad in the way that he's committing violence on his own life and sabotaging his own life and being very abusive of the people around him. This is the late 60s when he's married to Shelley Bonus, and she has talked about how, she was beaten by Richard when she was pregnant.
And one of the reasons, not to rationalize or ever justify violence against women or violence against anybody for that matter, but one of the reasons was the irrational mental rubber band of cocaine and drug addiction. Cocaine makes people mad, makes them angry, makes them violent. And that was certainly the case with Richard Pryor.
Richard's drug use and messy personal life earn him a bad reputation in Hollywood. Clubs won't book him, he's too volatile, and the money he's making is going straight up his nose. Richard was lost, and he was about to disappear completely in an attempt to turn his life around and curb his habits.
And alcohol and drugs were heavy during that time.
A place like Red's Place is where he engages in what he calls the Coke Olympics.
While being raised in a brothel in Peoria, Illinois in the 1940s and 50s, Richard Pryor discovers his unique talent for comedy, which takes him to New York in the early 1960s, where he experiences his first taste of success. After he relocates to Los Angeles later in the decade, Pryor continues to pursue his passion for comedy, but also discovers the allure of narcotics. In 1971, he decides to flee into obscurity in Berkeley, California.
I think my dad went to Berkeley was to find himself and to find out if he was being his true, authentic self. I think in order to find yourself, you have to go through certain things in order to find out who you really are. I think he was just tired and fed up and just, I got to be myself. I got to tell who I really am.
When he comes up to Berkeley, there's clothes on his back is basically what he has. You know, he feels like this funnel cloud of misfortune has been chasing him, and he's gonna try to leave it behind.
Scott Saul teaches at the University of California at Berkeley and wrote the book, Becoming Richard Pryor.
So here we are at 1505 Berkeley Way. We're in central Berkeley, and this is where Richard Pryor landed when he first came to Berkeley in February 1971. And the important thing to know about this area is that it's low-rent Berkeley. And so Richard Pryor didn't have much in the way of resources. He's crashing with his friend Alan Farley here at this modest home. This is a part of Berkeley that is, at the time, the most interracial demographically, and also the most politically radical.
In Berkeley, Richard has the freedom to experiment. He does a radio show with Alan Farley, befriends black intellectuals, and performs experimental live shows at venues like Mandrake's.
Behind those walls, there are some killers and some men who need killing and some men who are willing behind those walls.
And that really changes his life. That's the group of black artists and intellectuals, a lot of writers, who give him a sense that he can be an artist. He can lead a life of integrity that's tied to kind of assaulting the taboos in American life, being fearless, and finding his own medium of expression.
Richard moves out of Alan Farley's house to a bare-bones one-bedroom apartment around the corner, just off University Avenue in Berkeley.
So here we are. This is 1988 California Street. So he moves here. He brings a portable record player, the Speeches of Malcolm X, a book that he reads religiously. He listens on that record player to What's Going On by Marvin Gaye over and over again, and he thinks about his life. Here, he's really stripped down to nothing. It's a bare-bones apartment without much in the way of furniture, and he's not even trying to furnish it. He wants to lead that kind of monkish life where he's retreating into himself to find new parts of himself. So Richard could walk, and he could go to Mandrake's, which was a club not far down University Avenue, which had this really free and open vibe. And that was the place where he could take the stage, and he could be political, he could be cutting, he could be acerbic, he could experiment with being not funny, with audiences that are willing to be as experimental, perhaps, as he is. It's not a place that people really remark upon, and yet it was the site of this remarkable personal and artistic transformation. Somebody's living in Richard Pryor's old apartment, and I hope that the spirit of Richard Pryor is still coursing through it.
The city of Berkeley leaves an imprint on Richard. It makes him more serious, thoughtful, and combative, elements that will take his comedy to the next level.
If you didn't like to go to church, you could always hang out with the winos, because they knew Jesus personally themselves, right? I never met a wino didn't know Jesus. That's right.
When Richard returns to Los Angeles later in 1971, it's clear that the city of Berkeley has made him not only a changed performer, but a changed man.
You can see the before and after of Richard Pryor. The young Richard Pryor in a skinny suit, clean-shaven, clean language, talking about his childhood in a cute way, and then afterwards, talking about his childhood when he got beat up, talking about being addicted to sex, talking about drug use, growing his mustache and his hair out, and letting the language that he spoke off stage be the same as on stage.
Richard hones his new act at African-American-owned clubs in Los Angeles, like Maverick's Flat and Red's Place on La Cienega, run by one of Richard's heroes, Red Fox, who gives him the freedom to do the two things he loves: perform stand-up and take massive amounts of drugs.
So Richard Pryor at the Red Fox Room, it was a place he could go, a safe haven, to do stand-up with freedom. He wasn't gonna get fired if he used the F word. Red Fox wasn't gonna fire him. Also, he could go into the back room, into Red Fox's office, and snort all the cocaine he wanted.
A place like Red's Place, you know, is where he engages in what he calls the Coke Olympics. So this is the moment when the drugs are getting more serious and where he's kind of losing himself in that blizzard of cocaine.
Sadly for comedy fans, Red's Place closed in the early 1970s, and the site is now home to an anonymous mattress shop. Ron G. is a Los Angeles-based comedian influenced by Richard Pryor.
Oh, man. So right now, we are in a mattress shop that was a comedy spot owned by Red Fox. If I had to imagine, I would assume that the stage would be somewhere in the back. Right here would be the steps for the stage, and Richard would be somewhere up in here making everybody laugh, looking like himself, being a G on stage, rocking it out. This is where we having a good time. This is where it goes down. You know what I'm saying? Because you got Richard, you got Red Fox, you got all the ladies, you got that comedy that's unedited, uncut, and it's raw. That's what you really want to hear. I'm sure some cocaine residue somewhere, like in the cracks of his bed or in the bathroom. I'm sure it went down. There had to be some glass tables there. You know, it's mandatory back in the 70s to have a glass table in the green room of every comedy spot. So, yeah, I'm pretty sure it went down here.
The new Richard Pryor is on full display on the 1971 stand-up album Craps, recorded at Red's Place.
When Richard Pryor came back from the Bay Area, he recorded an album called Craps After Hours in this actual room. I'm so freaking excited, like, to know that he actually stood here and performed the album. I think that was the beginning of him becoming a blue, very honest and vulnerable comedian. Like, that was him, like, really doing Richard, and he became the Richard that we fell in love with.
While Richard sharpens his stand-up comedy act, he's also pursuing a career on the big screen. In 1972, he lands a small part in Lady Sings the Blues with Diana Ross.
Hey, baby, you know how to sing?
Yeah, I know how to sing, but he wants to dance.
You ain't got nothing to lose. You gotta try to think up a song.
He gets cast in this role, Piano Man. He's supposed to just say a few lines with Diana Ross, but he's so good at ad-libbing. And he invests so much into this character. He's actually channeling this piano player he knew from the jazz scene in Peoria. And it adds a whole new dimension to the picture. So Richard goes from a cameo role to having a starring role through his improvisations. And that's going to happen again and again in his career.
Lady Sings the Blues leads to greater success, more movie roles, screenwriting for Sanford & Son with his buddy Red Fox, and sharing an Emmy for co-writing a Lily Tomlin special in 1973. But Richard's reputation as a loose cannon continues to dog him.
You know, and alcohol and drugs were heavy during that time. You know, it was like a period where, you know, people didn't know, you know, how my dad was going to show up, you know, and was he going to be a liability? Think about when he helped write Blazing Saddles with Mel Brooks, how he didn't get that because the studio execs were worried. They didn't know what was going to, you know, how he was going to be here, how he was going to act, or how he was going to show up.
This is all swirling in, I would imagine, to the decision-making at Warner Brothers. And they decide to pick Cleveland Little instead of Richard, and it's a horrible disappointment and leads to much bitterness on Richard's part.
After the disappointment of Blazing Saddles, Richard stops making films and returns to his first love, stand-up comedy.
And it's ironically the fact that he didn't make it that first time in the movies that we can be grateful for, because it led to that long run of albums, starting with Something I Said and so on, that won these Grammys, and that established him as the kind of breakout revolutionary comedian that he became.
Richard's career is thriving, but his personal life continues to spiral into disarray. With a string of broken marriages, run-ins with the law, and a worsening drug habit, for Richard Pryor, the worst was yet to come.
It happened here, right here on Parthenia Street. Richard Pryor lit himself on fire and ran down this very street in an attempt to kill himself.
Born and raised in a brothel in Peoria, Richard Pryor moved to New York City and then Los Angeles in the 1960s. But it was the 70s that proved to be a great triumph for Pryor. After finding his true comedic voice while living in a bare-bones apartment in Berkeley, California, Pryor heads back to Los Angeles, where he continues to perfect his comedy while fueling his cocaine habit at Red Fox's Comedy Club. Arguably the most famous comedian in the world by the mid-70s, Pryor wins 3 straight Grammys for his groundbreaking stand-up, and his acting career takes off thanks to a number of high-profile movie roles and his own TV show, The Richard Pryor Show. And he's just moved to a sprawling estate on Parthenia Street in the San Fernando Valley, miles away from Hollywood and the prying eyes of the paparazzi. Chris Epting is an acclaimed author and expert on pop culture landmarks.
We are out in the San Fernando Valley, this sprawl out beyond Los Angeles. Richard Pryor liked living out here. I think he was more an outsider when it came to Hollywood and sort of the jet set elite. I don't think that's what he was all about. Living out in the San Fernando Valley, there were a lot less eyes on Richard Pryor, and he could, you know, build this compound for himself where he could do drugs really in the privacy of his own neighborhood. He didn't have paparazzi, he didn't have famous neighbors, for one thing.
The house on Parthenia was really nice going there because it was like its own compound pretty much. It, you know, had the main house, and it had a guest house, and it had stables and the tennis court, the swimming pool, and it was just a fabulous house. It was just great.
So this is a luxurious estate befitting a large star. But for Richard, his world is also getting very small.
But what fueled Richard's creative genius, his violent and abusive childhood in Peoria, is the same thing that's fueling his demons. One could not exist without the other. And for Richard, success and money are only making his problems worse.
So Richard Pryor's personal life was in disarray in the 1970s because there's all this unaddressed trauma in his life and all of this money all of a sudden.
But if you've never fixed what started you doing that line or what made you want to have that drink, if you never dealt with any of that period, it's still there. It's not going anywhere. So you're dealing with that, and then you're dealing on top now. Oh, I've got all the money. I can get what I want to get. I can buy what I want to get. I don't have to buy a little bag of Coke. I can buy the bag of Coke.
1978 is a particularly self-destructive year for Richard Pryor. He's put on probation in order to get psychiatric treatment after shooting the car owned by his latest estranged wife, Deborah McGuire. And his cocaine problem is now a much more dangerous freebasing problem. He retreats into his Northridge compound, where he's about to get the worst news of his life, that his grandmother Marie has died. Richard is heartbroken.
When she passed, that took a toll on my dad because, you know, that was his heart, you know. She raised him, you know, and it's like anyone losing a mother, that was a mother figure to him.
Because he really felt like Marie was his rock. She was a very jagged rock, but she grounded him. And after she dies, he's gutted with grief. He refuses to leave her body. They have to pull him away. And it's just like, who am I now without her? And this is the moment, you know, he's had a lot of struggles in life, but generally he bounces back. In fact, right after the death of Marie, he does film live in concert, understood by many people to be his greatest artistic achievement. So he kind of rolls with the show that he's created through the death of Marie.
But despite the massive critical and popular success of Richard Pryor live in concert, he can't shake the sadness and the conflicted feelings inside him caused by the death of Marie.
After that, he really descends into the worst moments of his addiction. He starts to freebase, and he's really gone into this intensely private world that is his estate at Parthenia.
We are driving on Parthenia Street out here in Northridge, which is part of the San Fernando Valley, just outside Los Angeles. And on this very street, what happened on this very street is Richard Pryor lit himself on fire in an attempt to kill himself in 1980.
At that moment, you know, that right before he lights himself on fire, he says that he's been up for 5 or 6 days straight. You know, his consciousness is fractured. He's hearing voices. He thinks he's having an argument with God. And he says, you know, I'm going to show you, God. You know, you think you control me, basically.
Freebasing at that point was a fairly new thing. People didn't know what that was, this concept of using ether to separate the base from cocaine to produce the strongest amount of drug. Nobody was freebasing in 1979, 1980. This was a totally new way to ingest cocaine. And Pryor was, you know, such an addict, his tolerance was just going up and up and up. So for him, he would do whatever it took to get really high.
He douses himself with that overproof rum. He tries to light himself. It doesn't work the first few times. And then like the third time it does, and he catches fire.
This is Richard Pryor's driveway on the night of June 9th, 1980. Richard Pryor is inside his mansion freebasing. Something goes crazy wrong, douses himself in Jamaica 151 proof rum, lights himself on fire, and runs out this gate. He turns the corner and starts running down this street, fully engulfed in flame. Police have been called. Neighbors are hearing him scream, Lord, give me another chance. There's a lot of good left in me. This poor man who's fully aflame is reaching out to God, praying for another chance, completely rethinking his suicide attempt.
And that's the moment when he realizes that he doesn't want to test God. He wants to live.
Richard Pryor has never said why he wanted to kill himself, but when you look at his life then, he was a drug addict. He was freebasing cocaine. He was psychotic. He was out of his mind. To me, the question is, why, as he was killing himself, did he all of a sudden change his mind and say to God, save me, there's good left in me. I've made people happy. I want to continue making people happy. That, to me, is sort of the beauty and magic of Richard Pryor, that he changed his own course in that moment and discovered the will to live right here on this street in 1980.
But while Richard decides that he wants to live, the fire ravaging his body has different plans. As he staggers down Parthenia Street, his clothes are beginning to melt into his skin. His chance of surviving is diminishing with each passing second.
What most people don't realize is that he ran for something like 1/3 of a mile. I mean, he ran a long distance while he was on fire. And when the ambulance approaches him, he doesn't even want to get on. He's still in this kind of fractured state where he thinks people are trying to hurt him.
Richard finally relents and is rushed to Sherman Oaks Hospital Burn Center with life-threatening injuries. His family wait to hear if Richard will live or die.
I remember my mother and my great uncle and myself and everybody was out there, cousins, everybody was out there. And I remember, you know, my dad did a joke about the doctor coming out and saying, Mrs. Pryor and the wives, different ones stood up. That actually happened. And then actually being able to see him and going and talking to him and, you know, watching how sick he was. And, you know, you're sitting there talking to your dad and watching flesh fall from his body. You know, it was really tough. It was a tough time.
Richard's burns are significant and horrifying.
He had pain, intense pain, for a long time after that, as it took him years, you know, to recover.
But miraculously, he makes a full recovery.
Richard's life really shifts dramatically after that moment. You know, somebody asks him where he was born after the incident with the fire, and instead of saying Peoria, he says the Sherman Oaks Burn Center. So there's a sense that a new Richard is born out of the ashes of the fire.
It sets up one of the most incredible comebacks and survivals in Hollywood history. He goes through months of rehab and you know, treatment for his third-degree burns all over his body. And a short time after, he's back on stage reflecting on what he did, making fun of what he did, acknowledging what he did. And it just speaks to, I think, the bravery and the confrontational courage of Richard Pryor. He didn't run away from it. He put it on stage, you know, where he felt it belonged. And there's not a lot of performers, I think, capable of doing that.
Richard may have recovered from the burns he suffered on Parthenia Street, but his years of hard living and substance abuse are about to cut his career short.
I don't think anything slowed my dad down until the multiple sclerosis. When your immune system is shot, you can't battle anything, you know, and it just took him down.
As a trailblazing comedic force, Richard Pryor defeats all odds, establishing himself as one of the most unlikely stars in Hollywood. His troubled experiences growing up in a brothel not only fuel his edgy comedic sensibility, it also fuels his personal demons that lure him into heavy drug use. On June 8, 1980, in Los Angeles, after freebasing cocaine, Pryor attempts to kill himself by pouring alcohol over his body, lighting himself on fire, and running a flame down Parthenia Street. But after a remarkable recovery, Richard is back on his feet. He makes a triumphant return to comedy in 1981, even poking fun at his own misfortune.
If I went through what my father went through as far as, you know, setting yourself, you know, pouring alcohol over you and lighting it, and then you survive it, I'm gonna try to be the first one to talk about it before anybody else.
After the freebase incident, a year later, he's on stage and talking about it. And people are like dying laughing, but they don't know it was a real thing. Nobody talks about the junk. That's crazy to say like the most personal, vulnerable stuff that can never happen to you and say it on stage like it's a joke and like, that happened. That was a Tuesday, you know?
Yeah, I remember that joke too. And that was like clever of him doing the actual joke. Yeah, I remember you guys talking about me, and he takes the book of matches out and he lights it and he says, "What's this? Richard Pryor running on the street?" You know, you have to be able to laugh at yourself.
Richard's genius for mining personal tragedy for laughs and laying his soul bare on stage is as strong as ever. But this time, he's not being entirely truthful.
Right after the fire happens, he concocts a story to say, you know, this was, you know, basically makes it seem like it was just a drug accident. And it's only later on that he reveals exactly what he had been going through.
But audiences are thrilled at Richard's return to comedy. He wins a Grammy for Live on the Sunset Strip and takes on a series of high-profile, family-friendly movie roles that show a softer, gentler Richard Pryor.
So Richard's films after the fire are really different than the films before the fire. And that's, I think, for two reasons. The first has to do with him physically, mentally. He's a changed man. But the second thing is that Hollywood has really changed. This is the era of the blockbuster.
In 1986, Richard is the highest-paid African-American actor in Hollywood. But sadly, decades of abusing his body have taken its toll.
I don't think anything slowed my dad down until the multiple sclerosis. That really was like it was like a stop. And I think because his was so progressive because of all the things that he had done. You know, when your immune system is shot, you can't battle anything. It just took him down.
Richard fades from the spotlight as his MS worsens. In 2001, he marries for the 7th time to Jennifer Lee, who he had already married and divorced from in the late 1970s. After a long, slow decline that sees Richard confined to a wheelchair, he dies on December 10, 2005 from a heart attack. For a man who cheated death 25 years earlier in the most public way possible, it was a sad and quiet passing.
It's an intense loss. At the same time, there's an equally intense legacy. What was that legacy? It's very complicated, but here are a few aspects. One thing Richard Pryor did was he established that nothing should be off limits in comedy.
I mean, my dad was outspoken about race. He was outspoken about his lifestyle, what he went through, what he did. He never hid anything.
I think Richard was the most unlikely star in Hollywood history because the odds were so stacked against him. And there were so many moments when it seemed like he was about to be crushed by circumstance and by his own impulses towards self-sabotage.
Man, Richard Pryor was everything. And he is everything. He's an idea, he's an American dream, he's hope, he's perseverance, and he's like everybody's cool uncle, man. He's the cool uncle to get drunk and just tell everybody business, man. So Richard Pryor is everything.
But Richard Pryor's legacy looms large. In 2004, he's named by Comedy Central as the greatest stand-up of all time.
Who do we have today in comedy who we could thank Richard Pryor for? Pretty much everybody. Pretty much everybody who's funny. Even bad comedians cite Richard Pryor as their hero.
Back in Peoria, the town is slower to embrace Richard's controversial legacy. But in 2015, after a long fight with the city, artist Preston Jackson is given the green light to erect a statue of the comedian, which proudly stands in the corner of Southwest Washington and State Streets, just blocks away from the site of the brothel Richard grew up in.
It's just kind of funny how these buildings kind of tell the story, only if people knew, you know?
Every day you pass by some spot where something happened, but you don't know about it. We have these emotional connections to movies and television shows and music and all these things that when you realize there's an actual physical space where they occurred, well, then all of a sudden you've got a connection with it.
And each location along Richard's path connects his life story. His stand-up shows for 6th grade classmates at Blaine Sumner lead to comedy lessons at the Carver Center, which gives him the confidence to pursue performing and make the leap to New York. And if he never goes underground in Berkeley, he doesn't find his true comedic voice and become an iconic force in Hollywood, which lures him down a drug-fueled path in his compound on Parthenia Street and ultimately leads to the defining moment in his life.